idea how racist they were. It's the royal family. You didn't Google this? It's the royal family. They're the original racists.
On a Netflix stage in Baltimore, in front of millions watching live, Chris Rock said the one thing about Meghan Markle that most people had only whispered, and the room erupted. It was not a cheap shot. It was a verdict, delivered with a comedian's precision. And it landed because everyone already suspected it was true. What almost nobody realized in that moment was that Rock was not the first to say it, and nowhere near the last. Over the next few years, some of the sharpest voices in comedy would circle the same target, arriving one by one at a conclusion the palace never saw coming. And the most brutal line of all came from someone who actually knew Harry. The man who started the avalanche. Here is what you have to understand about that night. Rock was not doing a royal bit. The whole special, Selective Outrage, was built on one nerve he kept pressing, that everyone in modern life is scrambling to be the victim, including the people who know full well they are nothing of the kind. Meghan was just the example that made the room lean in. He described her as a woman who seemed nice enough, but who simply would not stop complaining. And then he asked the question that lit the fuse. Had she not, in fact, hit the light-skinned lottery and somehow still found something to complain about? But he was only warming up. He went straight for her most explosive claim of all, the one from the Oprah interview, where the couple said someone in the family had raised concerns about how dark their baby's skin might be. Rock acted out her shock at discovering the royals might be prejudiced, then asked the thing everyone was privately thinking. It is the royal family. You did not Google these people before you married in. Some of what she went through, he argued, was not racism at all, just in-law friction, the ordinary stuff millions of families deal with. And he sealed it with the comparison that got one of the biggest laughs of the night. Complaining that the royal family turned out to be prejudiced, he said, is a bit like marrying into the Budweiser family and then acting stunned that they drink a lot. The royals, he added flatly, are the original racists. They practically invented colonialism. Now, remember who is saying this? Not a tabloid columnist. One of the most celebrated black comedians alive, a man who has spent 30 years dissecting race in America with a scalpel. The moment he treated her headline grievance as a punchline, something shifted that she could not undo from a stage in Montecito. Because the next voice to pile on was not going to be a comedian at all. It was going to be a cartoon. The cartoon that said the quiet part. Weeks earlier, in February 2023, South Park had already loaded the gun. An episode called The Worldwide Privacy Tour. And the setup is almost too on the nose to be legal. A prince of Canada and his wife roll into a small mountain town, insisting at every possible turn that all they want is privacy, that all they crave is to be left alone. And the way they go about demanding this privacy is by launching a worldwide press tour, hitting every interview stage they can find, literally holding up signs that read, "We want privacy," while shouting to anyone who will listen about how desperately they want to be ignored. Nobody said the names. They did not have to. A red-headed prince, a tell-all book, a wife in a very familiar outfit. Every single viewer knew exactly who was being filleted. And the reason it cut so deep is that it was barely an exaggeration. The Oprah sit-down, the Netflix docuseries, the podcast, the memoir, all of it delivered, while asking the world to please respect their private life. South Park just held up a mirror and let it run. Quick one before we go further, because you are going to want to be here for this. Hit subscribe right now, because the line I promised you at the start, the one from the woman who actually knew Harry, is the hardest thing anyone said in this entire story. And we are building straight toward it. And if you think that cartoon was brutal, wait until you hear what happened when the mockery jumped off the comedy stage and into the boardroom of a company that had actually paid them. The executive who signed the check. Back in 2020, the couple signed a podcast deal with Spotify, reported to be worth around $20 million. The plan was enormous, a whole slate of shows from their audio company. What actually landed was one series called Archetypes plus a single holiday episode, 12 episodes and a special. And then, in June 2023, the partnership ended. Deals end. That is not the story. The story is what came out of Spotify's own house on the way out the door. Bill Simmons, a senior executive at the company, went on his own podcast, and you could hear that he had been sitting on this for a while. He said he wished he had been in the room for the negotiation to let them leave, and then he delivered it. In his words, The Grifters was the podcast they should have launched with the couple in the first place. Not a joke he was building toward, just a flat-tired verdict from a man who had watched the numbers from the inside. Let that register for a second. Not a rival, not a critic. A man at the very company that wrote them the check, publicly branding them grifters. And here is the thing you should hold on to because it is about to matter even more. When the people funding you turn around and mock what they got for their money, that is not a public relations problem you can spin your way out of. That is a problem with the product. And the couple were about to put the biggest product of all in front of the whole world. The Netflix comeback that cooled fast. This was meant to be the reset, the lifestyle show. With Love, Meghan launched on Netflix in March 2025, sold as the polished return to screen that would finally rewrite the story. A beautiful farmhouse, celebrity friends dropping in, gentle tips on how to entertain. The reviews did not just miss, they savaged it. Critics called it an ego trip in a sun hat. One said, watching it felt like being gaslit by a multimillionaire. Another crowned her a Montecito Marie Antoinette, emerging from her mansion to find the crew had built her a little flower market to wander through. On Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score landed at 38%. The audience number was even lower, and you could feel the whole reset plan curdling in real time. The comeback that was supposed to soften everything only handing the comedians a fresh season of material, and you would think that would be the end of it. But here's where it gets almost hard to believe. They made a second season anyway, released in August 2025, and the second season scored worse, 20% from critics, down from an already frozen 38%. Behind the scenes, the couple's original blockbuster Netflix deal, once reported at around $100 million, had quietly been swapped for a smaller first refusal arrangement, the kind that gives Netflix the option to say no rather than a guaranteed fortune. You can survive almost anything in Hollywood: a flop, a scandal, a bad year. There is only one thing the town will never forgive, and it is the quietest verdict of all. And someone was about to say that verdict out loud, using 6 words about wanting things both ways. The contradiction at the heart of it all. That someone, at least first, was Bill Maher, and you cannot file him under conservative. He says openly he almost always votes Democrat, that he cannot remember the last time he pulled the lever for a Republican. So when he swung, it did not read as politics. He started almost disarmingly by handing Harry real credit, the kind he does not hand out lightly, for his military service in Afghanistan. That, Maher said, he would never mock because he had not done it himself, and there is nothing that compares to it. And then, having earned the room's trust with that fairness, he brought the hammer down. Everything after the service, in his view, was ridiculous, because the couple wanted it both ways. You cannot say these people were so cruel to us and we just want to be left alone, and then turn around and write an entire book about how badly you want to be left alone. It is a small sentence, but it is the whole case for the prosecution, delivered by a man the couple could not dismiss as some royalist crank. And that is the trap that kept springing shut on the whole crusade. The louder they insisted they craved a quiet, private life, the more public and more lucrative the insisting became. A memoir about wanting privacy, sold in every airport on Earth. But Maher was only naming the pattern. The person who was about to put a knife through the middle of it had actually stood in a room with Harry, and she had zero interest in being gentle. The line that silenced the room. Here it is, the one I promised you. And it did not come from a comedy special at all. It came from a podcast from Kelly Osbourne, daughter of Ozzy, someone who had moved in those circles and knew Harry well enough that everyone expected her to go soft. She did the opposite. On the show, I've Had It, in June 2023, the conversation drifted to Harry's minimal role at the coronation. And you can hear the exact second something in her just goes. The polite hedging drops away. She called him a whining, whinging complainer. She said he carries on as though he is the only person who has ever struggled with his mental health, as if his life alone has been hard, when everybody's life is hard. This from a woman who grew up inside fame, inside a famously chaotic household, who had every social reason to stay diplomatic and chose not to spend a single word on it. And then she said the thing that made even her own co-hosts go quiet. She reminded the room that this was a man who, as a young prince, once dressed up as a Nazi at a party. And now, she said, He is trying to come back as the Pope, lecturing the rest of us on how to be better human beings. Sit with the distance between those two versions of the same man. The costume that should have finished him, and the figure now positioned as the world's moral tutor. That gap is the whole joke, and Kelly just walked everyone straight through it. And you could hear it land on her co-hosts. That little silence that happens when a joke stops being a joke and turns into something truer than anyone was ready for. Nobody laughed it off. Nobody softened it. It just sat there in the room because there was no version of Harry's story that could answer it. Now here is what I could not stop thinking about once I lined them all up. Look at who these people were. A black American comedian, a pair of cartoon satirists, a liberal talk show host, a Spotify executive, the daughter of a rock star. People with almost nothing in common, no shared politics, no reason on earth to agree with one another. And every one of them landed on the same conclusion, without coordinating, without comparing notes. That is the moment a public figure should truly worry. Not when their enemies attack, but when people who have no reason to agree suddenly do. None of them manufactured a scandal. They simply said out loud what the cold reviews and the collapsed deals had already been whispering. They were not the scandal. They were the receipts. Because you cannot sell yourself as the world's most relatable victim from the window seat of a private jet. And once a room starts laughing, no amount of explaining ever pulls it back into pity. So, tell me, and I read every single comment, so do not be shy. Which one of these hit the hardest for you? Was it Chris Rock and the light-skinned lottery, Bill Maher and wanting it both ways, or Kelly Osbourne and that line about the Pope? Drop your pick down below. I genuinely want to know which one you would put on the thumbnail. If this made you smile even once, tap that like button. It helps the channel more than you would believe. And subscribe, because next time I am counting down every single country that has quietly told this couple no thank you. And one of them is going to surprise you. This story is not going anywhere, and neither, you will be glad to hear, am I.